Jason, what's with the hickey on your neck? Inside the private booth at the bar, one of Jason Miller's childhood friends pointed at his neck and asked, I heard Susie came back yesterday. You were the one who picked her up from the airport, right? Don't tell me you too? No way. Isn't Jason the one who claims to be allergic to women? Yeah, he dated Sophie Wu for 3 years, and Sophie still hasn't even had her first kiss. That's kinda hilarious if you think about it. You guys just don't get it. How could Sophie possibly compare to Susie Lane? Susie was Jason's first love, his unforgettable white moonlight. If she hadn't chosen to follow her brother abroad back then, Sophie never would have had the chance to be with him. I sat silently on the couch nearby, the center of their conversation, listening to everything they said. It felt like someone dumped a bucket of ice water over my head in the middle of winter. Every drop of blood in my body froze. That's when I noticed that on Jason's pale neck, there really was a dark purple hickey, clear and harsh against his cold white skin. He listened to their teasing with an indifferent expression and didn't deny any of it. A sharp, prickling ache shot through my heart. I stared at that mark, unable to come back to my senses for a while. All right, enough chatter. Susie's here. The door to the private room opened. Susie Lane stepped in, wearing a black, fitted spaghetti strap dress that hugged her tall and slender frame. Her wavy hair framed her strikingly beautiful face. She looked even better than in the photos. Long time no see, she greeted with a radiant smile. Amidst the whistles around the room, Jason stood up and reached his hand toward her. She naturally placed her hand in his, and with that flow, sat right down beside him. Compared to me, she looked far more like Jason's official girlfriend. You're more beautiful than ever, Susie. Did you come back to patch things up with Jason this time? She laughed. Don't be ridiculous. I heard Jason already has a girlfriend here. Don't even bring that up. You know better than anyone. Jason has issues with physical contact, especially with women. That girlfriend of his? They've been together for 3 years and haven't even kissed. Don't even mention anything beyond that. But the moment you return, here you are all flirty again, someone teased. A flush rose on Susie's cheeks. She glanced playfully at Jason. Why'd you tell them? Jason smiled faintly. I didn't say anything. Wait, is that true? Susie looked half amused, half surprised. You two really? Jason didn't respond. His eyes swept over to me with a distant, indifferent gaze. My face went pale, so shaken I couldn't even hold my wineglass properly. The liquid splashed onto my dress. Susie covered her mouth and collapsed against Jason's shoulder, laughing so hard her body trembled. You're too much. Look at her, she looks absolutely pitiful now. I stood up and slowly wiped the wet spot on my dress with a napkin. Jason watched me coldly from the side. In that agonizing pause, the pain surging through my chest slowly turned to numbness. But in that numbness, clarity began to set in. What I owed Jason, I had already paid back in full. 3 years ago, Jason shielded my face during a car crash. The broken glass pierced through his right hand. He was born to be an artist, famous at a young age, but after the accident, he could no longer pick up a brush. During his most hopeless days, his apartment was full of empty liquor bottles. Anyone who visited got screamed at and thrown out. It was during that time that Susie left him. I was racked with guilt, and only wanted to find a way to make it up to him. Back then, he sat on the messy floor with paint all over his hands. His face was still breathtakingly handsome, but his eyes were so dark, they seemed completely shut off from light. When I asked how I could make it up to him, he raised the corners of his lips mockingly and said, I've got everything I need, except a woman. In the 3 years that followed, he refused to go for medical follow-ups. I encouraged him to try painting with his left hand. Bit by bit, he began to rebuild his confidence. Through relentless practice, his left-hand technique became even more refined than before. His works were more breathtaking than anything he'd done with his right hand. Jason became increasingly dependent on me. Even though he couldn't bring himself to touch me because of his psychological block, he still insisted I remain within his line of sight whenever he painted. I understood Jason's past and never forced him to be close to me. There were several times when he cupped the back of my head, eyes fixed on my lips, inching closer and closer, his gaze full of longing, but every time he would suddenly stop right before making contact. The more he did that, the more it stirred something restless inside me. Jason's name began to spread again. It was around that time that he learned Susie Lane had returned to the country. It turned out he wasn't unwilling to have physical intimacy with women. It was just that the woman wasn't me. It was that the woman wasn't Susie. 2 days ago, after dinner, I left the table and stepped out onto the terrace for some air, only to overhear a conversation between Jason and one of his childhood friends. "Susie's coming back soon. What do you think?" "I heard she already broke up with your brother." Jason looked down and crushed his cigarette. "It's good that she's coming back. So you still can't let her go, huh?" "Honestly, Sophie's not bad either. When Susie hurt you so badly you couldn't even paint anymore, it was Sophie who stayed by your side and helped you slowly recover. She still doesn't know, right? That your right hand actually didn't suffer any nerve damage back then." I composed myself, picked up my purse, and pulled out the keys to Jason's place, setting them in front of him. "Oh wow, our soft and gentle little Sophie is finally putting her foot down," his friend teased, clearly enjoying the drama. Jason frowned. "What are you doing?" I threw the used napkin into the trash. "Jason, you know I'm a clean freak. I told you before, once something's been used by someone else, I won't even look at it again." For a moment his face darkened. He stared at me silently. "I'm sorry," Susie said, standing up with a hint of guilt on her face. "We were both drunk last night. I only found out today that he has a girlfriend. If I'd known, I wouldn't have said so much to him." Jason's expression returned to its usual calm. "Well, now that you're back, it doesn't matter whether I have a girlfriend or not." He looked me in the eyes, his words slow and deliberate. "It's not like I ever actually liked her anyway." But those words no longer had the power to hurt me. I smiled faintly at him. Jason's gaze sharpened. As I was about to leave the private room, I overheard one of his friends whisper, "Wait, Sophie's just leaving like that? She used to be infamous for being clingy. Nothing could get her to let go. I think she just realized she'll never win against Susie." Someone replied. "She's finally backing off." It wasn't until I stepped into the elevator that I finally exhaled deeply. I had poured all my love into the past 3 years, but in the end, it brought me nothing but heartache. A faint sound of breathing drifted into my ears, snapping me out of my thoughts. That's when I noticed the man in the elevator with me, Shane Kingston. His face was flushed, forehead beaded with sweat. One hand was braced against the elevator wall, his breathing heavy and uneven. He clearly wasn't feeling well. Instinctively, I wanted to step forward and help him, but something about his condition gave me pause. Something felt off. "What's wrong with him?" I wondered. He didn't seem sick in the usual way. Shane glanced at me. "Do me a favor, help me get to the parking garage." I hesitated, struggling internally for a second, but seeing how tightly his brows were furrowed and how uncomfortable he looked, I nodded. "Okay." I slowly stepped over and let him rest his arm across my shoulders. When the elevator reached the basement level, I helped him outside. His skin was burning hot, even his breath felt scalding. "Where's your car parked?" I asked. He muttered the location softly, his humid breath brushing against the side of my neck and shoulder, making me squirm with discomfort. I just wanted to get him into his car and leave quickly. Just then, Jason and his group stepped out of the elevator behind us. On instinct, I pulled Shane behind a structural column to hide. Shane's body was unexpectedly limp. He let out a low groan and collapsed weakly against me. "Wait a second, Jason. Look over there. Isn't that Shane Kingston from the Kingston family? And it looks like he's on top of a woman?" "No way. Seriously? That desperate? Hooking up right in the parking lot? Should we go take a look?" My entire body tensed up. It wasn't that I still cared what Jason thought, honestly, I didn't. It was just that the situation had become unbelievably awkward. And Shane Kingston, clearly not satisfied with the chaos, leaned down toward my ear, his breath scalding hot. "What do you think Jason would do if he saw this?" I shot him a fierce glare. His fingers had already slid to my waist, creeping slowly upward. "He normally won't even let other guys brush against your sleeve. If he saw me touching you like this, he'd probably lose it." Footsteps were approaching. I panicked and quickly pushed his hand away, my scalp tingling from the nerves. Shane's eyes shimmered with a faint glint. "He looked pretty heartbroken back there in the elevator. I'm guessing you and Jason broke up?" I whispered. So what if we did? But he suddenly laughed, his eyes lit with a fiery, watery glow. Just then, Jason's cold voice cut through the tension. Forget it. Susie and I have something to deal with. Let's go. Once they left, Shane finally let go of me. I stepped back a few paces to steady myself, irritated. You look perfectly fine to me. Didn't seem like you needed help at all. I was drugged. Drugged? A businesswoman from Hong Kong? She got pissed after I turned her down a few times and slipped something into my drink. He let out a slow breath, his gaze calm but amused. Relax. I'm not like Jason. Even drugged, I can still control myself. I gritted my teeth. Then what was all that just now? Leaning so close, I slipped up for a second, he said, not the least bit apologetic. I glared at him. But what really stunned me was what he said earlier. So, you already knew about Jason and Susie, meaning I was the last one to find out. Someone I know told me earlier tonight they saw the two of them checking into a hotel. He watched me carefully. With your personality, I figured you wouldn't just let that slide. I lowered my head. It took me a while to finally speak. 3 years. Even if it had started from guilt, those countless days and nights we spent side by side, the joys, the heartbreaks, we'd shared so much that it had nearly fooled me into believing we were in love. Being betrayed when you've given your heart, it hurts more than anyone can imagine. Shane gently patted my head and said softly, All right, don't be sad. If you start crying now, people might think I bullied you. The second he said that, I really did start to feel upset. My nose stung from holding back the tears. In a hoarse voice I asked, Do you have a tissue? Shane paused, then gave me a tissue and murmured, If only the timing weren't so wrong. If only the place weren't so wrong. My eyes, blurred with tears, lifted to look at him. Huh? My voice trembled from both the heavy nasal tone and the swell of emotions I couldn't suppress. His throat bobbed slightly. He covered his eyes. Damn that stupid drug. Suddenly I understood what he meant. Embarrassed, I stepped back. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? He chuckled. Idiot, I'll be fine after a little rest. Or you could just say something random to distract me. Okay. What did you have for dinner? He looked speechless. Something useful, please. All right then, what was the first thing you did after your vision came back 3 years ago? His expression shifted. He looked unexpectedly serious. I looked for you. I wanted to see what you looked like. I froze, completely caught off guard by his answer. 3 years ago, Shane Kingston lost his vision in a car accident. I was the caregiver assigned to look after him. Were you disappointed? He asked. I gave a small smile, trying to ease the awkwardness. Not really. He shook his head. It's not like I expected you to be stunning or anything. But when I finally saw you, you exceeded my expectations. I couldn't quite tell if that was supposed to be a compliment or an insult. I reached up and touched my face. I'll take that as a compliment. Though to be fair, you were pretty grumpy when we first met. Treated me pretty roughly too, he added. I guess I get it now, I said. Anyone would have a hard time accepting something like that, suddenly losing their sight. I gave him a gentle smile. So when your vision came back, I was genuinely happy for you. He looked at me for a long moment, a softness gradually surfacing in his eyes. Yeah, the first time I saw you, you were smiling at me just like that. I murmured a soft, but the moment quickly shifted. Not long after that, you handed me your resignation letter. Shane said, his voice turning flat. Said you had to go take care of your boyfriend, who was injured in a car accident. The way he said boyfriend was laced with quiet contempt. That kind of guy could actually be your boyfriend? All my life, people had said I wasn't good enough for Jason. It was the first time someone questioned whether Jason was even worthy of me. Since you two have broken up now, Shane continued, I guess there's no need to run around doing things for him anymore. He paused, then asked, Are you interested in working at my gallery as a curator? I've always trusted your sense of aesthetics. You've worked with Jason for years. You know my feelings, I've never hidden them from you. Shane leaned against the structural column and tilted his head as he looked at me. But this offer isn't just about personal feelings. I genuinely believe in your ability. 6 months ago, Shane's mother passed away after a long illness. As heartbreaking as it was, it also meant he no longer had to constantly worry about her overwhelming medical bills. And now, I was also in desperate need of a job, to pay off the debt I'd accumulated. After some hesitation, and with payment reminders piling up on my phone, I eventually reached out to Shane and accepted his offer. I had worked as Jason's assistant and manager for 3 years, attending countless art exhibitions and auctions. Over time, I developed a decent eye for art and a solid sense of curation. With that experience and knowledge of the industry, it didn't take long for me to adapt to the new role. As the workday was winding down, Shane walked over and tapped on my desk. "Well, I've helped you out quite a bit, haven't I? How about buying me dinner?" To be fair, this wasn't the first time Shane had helped me. A year ago, my mom was diagnosed with a critical brain tumor. The tumor was large and located deep in her brain, making the surgery extremely high risk. There were only a handful of doctors in the country capable of operating on it, and they were nearly impossible to book. I was overwhelmed with panic, and it was Shane who helped me contact the right doctor. From pre-op prep to the post-op recovery, he handled every detail. I owed him more favors than I could count. "You're right," I said with a smile. "I should properly thank you. You picked the place." Shane grinned. "Deal." He took me to a stylish music restaurant, the kind of place with live band performances every night. What I didn't expect was to run into Jason and Susie there. Wow, couldn't even wait a few days before showing up to mark her territory? Someone from Jason's table said. Jason was right. She couldn't hold back. "He's the best she'll ever do. She's made a fortune just from the commission off his paintings. What woman would walk away from that?" Jason lounged back in his chair, staring straight at me, his smile faint and unreadable. Hearing them talk so openly made my body tense up. Shane had gone to park the car, but now he returned and gently draped an arm over my shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked in a soft voice. "Just couldn't find the table," I replied quickly, heart loosening slightly. Jason really had given me a lot of financial support. I took care of his daily needs, handled his gallery contacts, and organized his exhibitions. Every time he sold a painting, he gave me a share of the profits. At first, I hadn't even wanted to take the money. My parents had left behind a mountain of debt, and I needed to keep working constantly just to pay it off. That meant I didn't have much time left to spend with Jason. After a while, he grew increasingly dissatisfied. "You have time to run around earning a few measly bucks," he said coldly, "but not enough time to stay by my side and be my assistant? I've told you, I can't paint when you're not around, and the money I give you is way more than you'd make tutoring outside." Over the course of 3 years, the crushing debt on my back eased considerably. I was grateful to him. But maybe in Jason's heart, he thought I only ever helped him pick up the brush again because of the money. The waiter led us to our table, and Shane pulled out my chair like a true gentleman. Unfortunately, our table happened to be right next to theirs. Just as the server placed our menus down and turned to leave, I saw Susie pick up the wine glass in front of Jason and take a sip. He smiled at her, probably saying something like, "The wine's good." Jason had severe OCD. He hated anyone touching his personal belongings. He would never, under any circumstance, share utensils with someone else. Susie was the only exception. She was the only one allowed to touch his things, the only one he'd ever share a glass with. I suddenly remembered the time I accidentally drank from his cup. His face turned cold in an instant. I panicked and apologized, but he simply threw the glass away, even though it had once been his favorite. But now Susie did the same thing, and he didn't mind at all. Instead, he looked at her indulgently, not a trace of rejection in his expression. Everyone knew Susie was Jason's muse. All of his pre-20 works were inspired by her. Every painting whispered his longing and love for her. Before, my understanding of Susie had only ever come from imagination. But now, seeing it for myself, I truly understood just how special she was to him. Shane's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "Do you want a drink tonight?" I blinked, caught off guard. I was a lightweight, the kind who got drunk after just one glass. Worse, I tended to lose control when I was drunk. Unless I was with someone I trusted completely, I rarely touched alcohol. "It's my birthday today," Shane said. "Oh, really?" I smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I didn't know." I glanced around. "Is it just the two of us?" In past years, Shane's birthday parties were extravagant affairs. But now, he just smiled faintly. "Didn't feel like dealing with anyone else. I just wanted to spend it with you." My heart skipped a beat. It was rare for anyone to treat me with such straightforward tenderness. I didn't know how to respond, so I lowered my head and awkwardly murmured, "Okay." As the live band began to sing softly in the background, I unknowingly finished my first glass. Shane gently refilled it for me. I quickly waved him off. "I'm a terrible drinker. Really, I can't handle more. It's fruit wine, very low alcohol content," he said. "You're still feeling okay, right?" To be honest, other than feeling a bit warm, my head wasn't spinning. Remembering that it was his birthday, I nodded and didn't refuse him again. Suddenly, there was a loud clash of silverware and plates beside me. The abrupt noise startled me, and I turned to look, right into Jason's angry gaze. "Don't mind him," Shane said calmly, switching his own plate of steak with mine. "I heard this Wagyu is flown in from Australia. It's supposed to be incredibly tender. Try it." "Oh, okay." I pulled myself together and speared a piece of beef, popping it into my mouth. It was so delicious I couldn't help but smile at him. He reached out and ruffled my hair, smiling back. "Glad you like it." Maybe it really was the low alcohol content, because even after 2 glasses, I still felt surprisingly clear-headed, just a bit flushed and dizzy. My heart, on the other hand, was pounding wildly. When I looked at Shane, I noticed my eyes had started to soften, the world around me blurring just a little. "I'm going to the restroom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, concern in his eyes. "You're a little tipsy. I'll get a waitress to go with you." I shook my head, placed my napkin back on the table, and stood up. But as soon as I did, I swayed a little. "You okay?" Shane stood and reached out to steady me. That's when Jason suddenly appeared behind us and slapped Shane's hand away from my waist. "Don't lay a hand on him," I said sharply. Jason had always rejected any physical closeness from me, acted like even brushing my hand was disgusting. And yet, he wouldn't let any other man near me either. I'd known this about him, so I had always been extra cautious around other men, keeping a proper distance. But now, we'd already broken up. A quiet anger stirred in my chest. Still, since we were in a public place, I didn't want to cause a bigger scene. "Let's ask the waiter to move us to another table," Shane said gently. Compared to Jason, Shane was clearly the more rational one. Jason's eyes flickered with disbelief. He clearly hadn't expected me to embarrass him like that in front of everyone. I ignored him and turned away, heading straight for the restroom. By the time I returned, the server had already relocated our table to a quiet corner by the wall. "I'm sorry," I told Shane softly. "Not only did I not bring you a gift, I even messed up the mood of your birthday dinner." He smiled and nodded toward something behind me. "I don't think you ruined the mood." I followed his gaze and realized Jason had been staring at me the whole time, his eyes cold and dark. Shane curved his lips into a faint smile. "Let me show you something interesting." He leaned forward, one hand resting on the table, and gently pressed a kiss against my lips. Through the slightly chaotic background music, I heard Jason curse loudly before storming over. He grabbed Shane by the collar and punched him hard across the face. "Who the hell gave you permission to kiss her?" Shane didn't back down. He grabbed Jason's collar in return and punched him right back. The restaurant manager rushed over to break up the fight. I immediately stepped between them, shielding Shane. Blood was already visible at the corner of his mouth and his cheek was starting to swell. Seeing me protect Shane only enraged Jason more. He raised his fist again, clearly ready for another hit. "If you touch him again, I swear I'll call the police," I shouted. Jason clenched his jaw. "You care about him now, huh?" I'd had enough. I didn't care how many people were watching. I was done pretending. "We already broke up, Jason. If you're gonna lose your mind, at least do it with some boundaries." He glared at me, breathing hard. Susie came over and tugged on his arm, clearly flustered. "Jason, let's go," she said softly, trying to calm him down. There was unmistakable guilt in her expression as she tried to keep his temper in check. I helped Shane out of the restaurant. Behind us, Jason spat out one last cruel remark. "What's so great about a blind man anyway?" His words were harsh and awful, but I just replied calmly, "He suits me better." Jason's expression darkened completely. I stopped at a nearby pharmacy and bought some medication. In the car, I helped Shane clean up his injuries. "Does it hurt?" I asked as I held an ice pack to his swollen cheek. He nodded. "Serves you right," I muttered. That was your first kiss, I added, glaring at him. He pursed his lips and stayed quiet, but then suddenly grinned, looking ridiculously proud of himself. Totally worth the punch, he said. I tossed the ice pack into his lap and opened the car door. Doesn't seem like you're in that much pain. It's late, I said, stepping out. I should head home. He quickly reached out to grab my hand. The motion pulled on the corner of his lip and made him wince. Don't be mad, he pleaded. I know I messed up. His hand wrapped around mine gently. There's still 2 hours until midnight. I haven't had any cake yet. Looking at him like that reminded me of how he was 3 years ago, after we'd grown close. He had shed that cold, aloof shell, and whenever he was upset or made a mistake, he'd come to me just like this, soft and awkward, trying to make it right. Moments like this made him feel strangely familiar. Closer somehow. All right, I'll go buy you a cake, he smiled, okay. After we bought the cake, he asked, do you want to go back and see the place where you used to take care of me? His suggestion caught me off guard. I thought he'd hate that place, considering how many painful memories it must have held for him. But to my surprise, the apartment was spotless. Everything was laid out exactly the way it used to be. Shane set the cake down and led me straight to one of the rooms. The moment he opened the door, my chest tightened. Inside were rows and rows of Winnie the Pooh plush toys, neatly arranged on the bed and the table covered in lace. I kept them all, he said. After his accident, Shane had suffered temporary blindness due to cerebral hemorrhaging that pressed against his optic nerve. The doctor had told us it would take 3 to 5 months for the brain to absorb the blood. If his vision didn't return by then, it could be a more serious problem. In the beginning, Shane couldn't adjust to the darkness. He became increasingly irritable. He'd sweep everything off the shelves, refuse to eat, refuse to sit in a wheelchair. He'd rather stumble around the room and bruise himself all over than let me help him. He went through 3 or 4 caregivers before me. I was the only one who stayed. Because I didn't feel safe leaving him alone in the bathroom, I would stand with my back turned just outside the door, listening closely for any sound of him falling. One time, while he was getting dressed, he accidentally dropped his towel. As he bent down to pick it up, he hit his head on the edge of the sink and let out a sharp cry of pain. I immediately turned around to check on him and saw something I definitely wasn't supposed to see. My face flushed red with embarrassment, and my blood surged. He ended up giving up on dressing himself and asked me to help him instead. I'd never been that physically close to a young man before. Completely flustered, I blushed furiously as I helped him put his pants on. What are you shaking for? He snapped. Never seen a guy before. At that point, I'd already grown used to his sarcastic jabs. I didn't take it personally, especially not when I was getting paid. Besides, he actually had a really nice body. Over time, I noticed he kept a Winnie the Pooh plush toy on his nightstand. He treated it with great care and wouldn't let anyone else touch it. For someone with such a bad temper, it was surprisingly childlike. One day, I asked him about it without thinking. I assumed he'd respond with his usual disdain and tell me to mind my own business, but instead, he went quiet for a moment and told me about his past. When I was 8, he said, my mom gave me that toy and told me she'd recorded her voice inside. She said whenever I missed her, I could press the button and she'd come back soon. But after the toy broke and stopped playing her voice, she never came back. It wasn't until much later that he found out she'd had a heart condition. She left to get surgery, but the operation failed. Do you know why I kept you and no one else? He asked me once. I blinked. Why? A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Because your voice reminded me of hers. To help pull Shane out of that dark place, I did something completely out of a Korean drama. I bought him one small teddy bear every day. Inside each one, I recorded a message of encouragement. I told him, once you collect 100 bears, you'll be able to see again. When I gave him the first one, he immediately rolled his eyes. What is this? You think you're in some rom-com? I was a little embarrassed. I paid for all of them with my own money. If they work, you'll have to pay me back. He held the bear in his hands, head lowered, lost in thought. After a while, he let out a quiet laugh. Unfortunately, even after 3 months, Shane still hadn't regained his vision. He went to the hospital for a checkup, and the doctor said his optic nerve had begun to atrophy slightly. Recovery would take longer than expected. But this time, he took it much better. He calmly let me wheel him out of the hospital. It wasn't until a year later, on a rainy afternoon, that something changed. I'd gone out to buy groceries when the downpour started. Worried about leaving Shane home alone, I tried to rush back, but, for the longest time, no ride-sharing app would accept my request. After finally managing to hail a cab, I climbed in, only to realize someone was already inside. And that someone was Jason. He was a renowned painter who'd gained fame at a young age, with looks that could rival any idol. He had a huge fan base of female followers online. The driver chuckled and said, "This handsome guy couldn't bear to see you getting soaked in the rain, so he asked me to come pick you up." I was completely stunned and quickly thanked Jason over and over. But aside from glancing at me once when I got in, he didn't say a single word. Later, our car was rear-ended by a truck. We were both injured. In order to shield my face, Jason had used his hand to block the shattered glass. It pierced straight through his palm. That accident tied our lives together in a way neither of us had planned. It wasn't until much later that I found out the only reason Jason had sent the cab for me that day was because I happened to look a lot like Susie Lane with the outfit I was wearing, maybe 60 or 70% similar. After the accident, I took time off from my job with Shane, but I didn't tell him about the injury. I didn't want him to worry. Sometime later, I got a call from Shane. His voice was filled with emotion. "Sophie, I can see now. I was genuinely happy for him. That's amazing." He asked where I was. He wanted to come see me. I hesitated for a moment and then said apologetically, "Now that you've regained your sight, I guess my job doesn't have much meaning anymore. I was actually planning to resign." He clearly hadn't expected that response. There was a pause before he asked, "Why?" "Do you know Jason Miller? He's a painter. Not long ago, we were in a car accident. He hurt his right hand protecting me. He needs someone to take care of him." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice soft. "If you don't have time to meet, we can talk over the phone." Then he exhaled lightly. "I like you." I froze. It took a long time before I could say anything. But I already promised to be his girlfriend. And just like that, we missed our chance. "After you left," he said, picking up one of the teddy bears I'd given him, "these little bears kept me company through a lot of boring nights." He flicked the switch on one, and it raised its tiny arms while playing back my voice, faint and a little awkward. "Shane, you're an amazing person. Believe in yourself, you can do it." I instinctively curled my toes in embarrassment. "Every time I heard it," he said, smiling, "I could picture you recording it with that awkward, flustered expression on your face." I couldn't help but smile too. "Isn't it because my encouragement was warm and touching?" He didn't deny it. "Yeah." Shane looked at me. "Sophie, there's something warm about you." He leaned in and hugged me gently, letting out a quiet sigh. "That's what draws people like me to you. During those darkest, most painful nights, it was thoughts of you that gave me the courage to open my eyes each morning. I really regret not telling you how I felt back then," he whispered. "Sophie, I've waited 3 years. Can you give me a chance?" Maybe it was the lingering buzz of the wine, or maybe it was his words that stirred something deep inside me. Under the soft lighting, his features looked even gentler, and his eyes held a tenderness I hadn't noticed before. I tiptoed and gave him a kiss on the lips. He froze. Then I looked up at him and asked softly, a little hurt, "See? Kissing me isn't that terrible, right?" Jason had pushed me away for 3 years, yet the day Susie came back, he slept with her. Just because I didn't show it, didn't mean it didn't hurt. Shane pulled me into a tight embrace, answering my words with his body. His kiss was eager and slightly clumsy, like he was more overwhelmed than I was. Once he approved the theme of the exhibition, I dove into planning. I confirmed the venue, handled lighting, and layout design. When I heard that a renowned Japanese artist was visiting the country, I worked tirelessly to contact his team. The artist had never granted authorization for his work in China before. Hoping to secure an exclusive, I flew to his city myself. I poured all my sincerity into the meeting, from my deep understanding of his art to my admiration for him as a person, to how his pieces aligned perfectly with our theme. He told me he would seriously consider it and get back to us. I couldn't tell whether it was a gentle rejection or if he truly meant it. Either way, I couldn't afford to rely on just one artist. While I traveled to other cities negotiating with painters, Jason sent me a painting. It was a portrait of Susie, one I had never seen before. Beautiful, pure, and translucent, her eyes seemed to carry the essence of a midsummer rain. The rain was cool, but soaked with summer's humidity and restless heat. Jason had no idea himself, but he named the painting Evening Dew. So this was how he saw Susie. His intentions were clear. He sent me the painting just to make a point. After all, in the 3 years we were together, he never painted me, not once. With Jason's reputation, his piece would no doubt elevate the status of my exhibition. I had no real reason to turn it down. But even though he knew I accepted it, he still called me, furious. His voice came through the phone, low and tight with repressed anger. "Are you that desperate for money?" I couldn't help but laugh, glancing at the painting off to the side. "Mr. Miller, you of all people should know, I've always needed money." I added, "I suppose I should thank you on behalf of the gallery for your contribution. It's a beautiful painting. Miss Lane looks absolutely radiant. I'm sure it'll sell for a price you'll be satisfied with." On the other end of the line, I heard his breathing grow heavier, more uneven. For a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then he said, "Fine. Then in exchange for using that painting, I want you to do something for me. That's fair, right?" "What is it?" I asked. "You'll know when we meet." He arranged to meet at his studio. It had been a long time since I'd stepped foot in that space, and it was far messier than I remembered. Jason sat in front of his easel, eyes bloodshot. All over the floor were torn and crumpled sheets of sketch paper, upturned paint palettes, and spilled paint. It was obvious he'd been creatively stuck lately. That surprised me. I had assumed that with Susie's return, he'd found his muse again and would be inspired. But apparently not. "What do you want me to do for you?" I asked. He didn't respond right away. His gaze passed through me like he was looking at something else entirely. I stepped forward. He finally spoke. "Just do what you used to do." It took me a second to understand. He wanted me to stay with him the way I used to sit silently in the same room while he painted. I hesitated for a few seconds, then crouched down to help clean up the chaos on the floor. In the past, when he painted, I always tried to be as quiet as possible, never disturbing him, so just doing my own thing quietly beside him. Minute by minute, time slipped by. For a moment, it felt like I had traveled back to those 3 years when we were all each other had. Eventually, I wanted to look up and see how his painting was coming along, but Jason stopped me. "Turn around. Don't look." "Okay," he said quietly. "My birthday's in 3 days." "You promised you'd be with me." I had, once, but he'd never remembered mine. The last time, Susie had just returned, and as expected, he forgot it completely. Maybe he remembered that now, because after a long pause, he said, "Since you're here, I'll make it up to you with a gift." That evening, I realized Shane had been waiting for me at home. "You met with him?" he asked, calm but clearly holding something back. "Yeah," I said, thinking he meant work. Jason agreed to let us use the painting. Shane went silent for a moment. "That's good." 3 days later, the preparations for the exhibition were finally wrapping up. We got an official reply from the Japanese master. He had agreed to license his artwork. I was over the moon and wanted to celebrate. I took extra time getting ready, even putting on a dress I rarely wore. The neckline dipped a little low, maybe too low. I hesitated, but I thought Shane would probably like it. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. When I opened the door and stood in front of Shane, I instinctively crossed my arms over my chest. A little self-conscious, a flicker of amazement passed through his eyes, and I felt secretly pleased. But then he gave me a quick once-over, his brows tightening slightly. I slowly lowered my hand, my ears burning. Feeling a bit nervous, I loosened my grip. His gaze fell on the neckline of my dress. He pressed his lips together. This wasn't the reaction I had expected. His expression darkened. "You're really planning to wear that? Is there something wrong with it?" His face grew even more serious. "Of course, there is." I glanced down at myself. Judging by his reaction, he must have thought I looked inappropriate or something. I suddenly felt deflated. "No man wants his girlfriend dressed like that to go meet someone else," Shane muttered. I wasn't planning to meet anyone else, I replied softly. Shane froze for a second. Aren't you going to Jason's birthday party? Ugh. So that's why he was upset. I'm not going to his party, I said, looking him in the eyes. The Japanese master agreed. He's even coming in person. Shane had once told me, if that master shows up himself, the exhibition is already half a success. I saw his expression shift. I'm really happy, I said, and grateful for everything you've done to help. That's why I made a reservation at a fine restaurant so I could treat you to a proper dinner. His ears turned a faint red. Oh, I misunderstood then. So will you come? I asked. His gaze slowly swept over me, then stopped. The room seemed to get warmer. Anyway, we should go, I said, flustered by the way he was looking at me. I turned to walk toward the door, but he reached out and stopped me. There's no need for a fancy restaurant, he said, his voice low and a little hoarse. Right now, I'm more interested in something else. For 3 years with Jason, even the brush of our fingertips had been considered too intimate. But now, Shane kissed me, his lips warm and slightly trembling. It was unfamiliar. The air felt sticky, my eyes blurred with heat. I couldn't see clearly. I felt embarrassed, ashamed even. I didn't want him to look at me like this. But my heart tightened. My phone buzzed again and again at my ear. I couldn't be bothered to check it. The calls kept coming, relentless. Finally, Shane picked up the phone, glanced at the screen for a second, and hit a button before tossing it aside. That didn't count, he said, his expression suddenly turning grim. I hugged him, my cheeks flushed red, and whispered, It's okay, Shane. It was my first time too. From the other end of the line, there was a sharp crashing noise and the sound of someone breathing heavily, furious. If you lay a finger on her, I'll kill you. It was Jason. Shane ended the call without hesitation and went back to kissing me. It wasn't until the next day around noon that I finally woke from sheer exhaustion. When I turned my phone back on, I saw that Jason had called me over 100 times. Bits and pieces of last night came back to me. He must have heard everything. But I didn't care anymore. I dragged myself out of bed and found Shane in the kitchen, making porridge. The sunlight hit his face just right, outlining his features. He looked stunning. I padded over barefoot and leaned gently against him. Unable to stop myself, I asked the question that had been on my mind since last night. At your age, shouldn't you be, you know? He clearly understood what I was getting at. He awkwardly looked away. You once said, you didn't like things that had been touched by others, I whispered. My heart clenched as I wrapped my arms around his waist. This fool, he really had waited 3 years for me. After breakfast, I tidied up a bit and got ready to head home to grab a few things. But I didn't expect to run into Jason right outside my door. He must have waited the whole night. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked exhausted and disheveled. His hand seemed injured, his fingers stained red. A dried pool of blood had formed on the ground beside him, dark and unsettling. He glanced at Shane, then locked eyes with me, as if he'd noticed the kiss marks on my neck. His gaze dimmed, and the injured hand trembled slightly. Did you too, last night? He asked. Yeah, Shane said, wrapping his arm around my shoulders, his voice low, almost languid, like he was still savoring it. Sophie, she's really soft. I saw the flicker of violence in Jason's eyes. Shane leaned in and kissed me affectionately. I should thank you, really. You made her live like a widow for 3 years. And yet, her first kiss was still mine. Jason's forehead twitched, his eyes going bloodshot. Say that again, I dare you. Before I could react, Jason had already punched Shane to the ground. What's the big deal? Shane said, blood pooling at the corner of his lips, yet still managing a crooked smile. Kissing wasn't all we did. We've done a lot more than that. His words were deliberately provocative, and every word was like a slap to Jason's pride. He was so nervous, he couldn't even open his eyes. The slightest touch made him shake, but none of that matters anymore. Jason lost it, completely. The two of them started fighting, fists and fury flying. I tried to break them up, but it was useless. In the end, I had no choice but to call the police. Only when the officers arrived did the fight finally stop. Shane's eyes were bruised, and he was panting heavily, but there was pride written all over his face. You can't compare to me, he said coldly. Sophie's a clean freak. She's never had another man. But you? He glanced at Jason with contempt. You're disgusting. Jason turned pale. I gave my statement to the police, making it clear that Jason had thrown the first punch and Shane had acted purely in self-defense. In the end, Jason was taken into custody for 7 days for assault. Shane was hurt pretty badly, but his mood was oddly upbeat. At least Jason has decent taste, he joked. He saw how good we looked together. That was actually something Jason had said, bitterly, the last time they exchanged punches at the restaurant. I sighed. It was hard to know if I should laugh or cry. At least there was still time before the exhibition opened. Otherwise, if Shane showed up to the media looking like this, the internet gossip would never stop. A few days later, Jason called me. "You're out?" I asked. He paused for a moment before saying, "The painting I gave you, it has issues. It needs to be revised." "You mean Evening Dew?" "Yeah. But that was from 5 years ago. Are you sure it's necessary to change it now?" I took a shallow breath. "I'll have my assistant send it over." "No," he replied. "I'll come to your gallery." Jason showed up not long after. His face was still bruised, his hand wrapped in gauze, and he looked noticeably thinner. I led him to my office where an easel and paints had been prepared. "Take your time. No one will disturb you," I told him and turned to leave. But he stopped me. Jason reached out and grabbed my hand. I froze. He almost never touched me before. In the past, he avoided all women except for Susie. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight. "What's wrong?" I asked. He took a step forward and cornered me against the door. His eyes were tinged with red, as though barely holding something back. He lowered his head, leaned close, and whispered, "Isn't this what you always wanted?" His soft lips brushed my lashes. He trembled slightly, then deepened the kiss. "Sophie?" I was caught off guard and didn't dodge in time. He pried open my lips, and I quickly pushed against his chest. The familiar scent of Jason overwhelmed me, mixed with sweetness, his tongue slick and forceful. His gaze darkened as one hand slid down to my waist. My tears welled up uncontrollably. This intimacy, something I once longed for, now felt nothing but revolting. I bit down hard on his shoulder. Jason gasped in pain and staggered back, eyes wide with shock. "Get out," I snapped. I was furious, insane. There was probably blood in his mouth, but he swallowed it down with clenched teeth. "So he can, but I can't? Is that it?" My head spun from anger. He can do whatever he wants, but I can't? Jason's chest rose and fell violently before he slowly said, "What if I told you that nothing ever happened between me and Susie?" I looked into his eyes. "It doesn't matter. To me, you're already dirty." The exhibition opened on schedule. With the participation of the famous Japanese artist, the event attracted a huge number of people from the art world and the media. It went more smoothly than I'd expected. Jason came to the reception. People kept coming up to greet him, but he remained cold and unresponsive. Eventually, they all stopped trying and drifted away. He walked up to me. His eyes were unreadable, full of emotions I couldn't quite name. "Congratulations," he said. I stayed silent for a moment, then smiled politely and raised my glass. "And congratulations to you too, Mr. Dawson. Evening Dew sold for an impressive price." He had eventually modified the painting. The day he came to revise it, right before leaving, he dipped his hand into red paint and smudged Susie's face on the canvas. But somehow that stroke brought deeper meaning to the piece. Beneath the image of a holy and innocent girl, her eyes burned with a shocking red, her face dappled with desire. Jason froze, his voice lowering with a subtle edge. "Could you stay a little while after the reception? I want to talk." Before I could answer, Shane came over and guided me toward a well-known business executive. "Sophie, this is Mr. Shu," he said, smiling. I'd never handled alcohol well, and tonight's socializing only made it worse. By the end of the night, I was lightheaded. On the way home, I rolled down the window. The breeze carried the city's scent, easing the drunken haze in my mind. "Honestly," I said, my words slurring a bit, "I've been anxious all day. I kept worrying something would go wrong, that I'd mess up the whole event and disappoint you." "You did great," Shane said gently. "Better than I expected. You were the highlight of the entire event. From now on, more people will recognize your talent." My nose tingled, but I didn't want him to see I was getting emotional, so I forced a laugh. "Then am I finally going to be rich?" He laughed. "Definitely." I rested my head on his shoulder. "Thank you." At our wedding, I saw the painting Jason had called me over to see that day. Turns out, it was of me. In the painting, I wore a green dress and was bent over, patiently guiding him to draw with his left hand. His expression was peaceful, a soft smile on his lips, radiating trust and dependence toward me. Crumpled paper littered the floor, paint had been spilled everywhere. The bandage around his right hand was half unraveled, revealing an uninjured hand underneath. Morning light streamed in through the window, casting a glow on his determined left hand, gripping the brush. The title of the painting was Left Hand, and I realized then I had lost my left hand forever. That same day, Jason officially announced his retirement from the art world.